And before you get to Baghdad, you're already in a desert zone. It's out of the rain-fed territory. Baghdad itself is a very, very large city. It's about, at this point, something like 12 million people. You have not very much left of the old housing or anything from the Arabian Nights. You have a few of these older Turkish houses along the shore here, and there are a couple over in here. But basically, most of it's been torn down and replaced with these hopeless 20th century modern buildings. And even in places like the bazaar, you don't very often find much that's older than, say, 1900. You have a few bits of mosques, and you have one or two pieces in the bazaar where you're in ancient territory. But basically, much of the town has been changed. South of Baghdad, you're in an area which is relatively flat. From Baghdad south to the Gulf, down here, you have it's a very, very low, flat plain. You're with a very, very low gradient. You're hardly going downhill at all. You are going downhill, but it's a very, very slow downhill. And what happens is the Euphrates comes down, and this is a map which shows you how the water flows over the landscape. And you can see that the Euphrates comes and covers just about half the territory. The Tigris comes down, and it's a much, much faster river at this point, and it cuts deeply into the alluvial soil, and it meanders like crazy. You can see these meanders here. It is meandering as it comes down to a town called Kut. From this point on, it actually reaches the level of the land, and therefore it begins to distribute naturally. If it floods, the water goes like this, and if you do irrigation, you irrigate off that, and you take advantage of that. In the last 150 years or so, you've been able to irrigate off the Tigris because you have pumps, mechanical pumps that allowed you to irrigate the land on both sides. But essentially, up into the 1950s, most of this area you're looking at here was desert. It had not been reclaimed for agriculture, although this was ancient Sumer, this is ancient Akkad, and this was one of the greenest places in the world. If you look at this map from 1860, it was basically done by a bunch of British officers who came in from India to map this part of Iraq, because even then England had its eye on Iraq. This was under the Turks at the time. Here you have ancient Babylon, and this is a bit of green here and a bit of green here and here and here. But essentially, and you have green, these are all palm groves along the Tigris. But essentially what you're looking at is a desert landscape. And it's a desert landscape that is extraordinarily interesting because you have these long strings like this and like that and like that. And what you're looking at here these are Islamic and earlier canals, old canals that stand up above the surface of the land and are the most prominent feature. And then you have all these little dots that look like little bugs. Those are all archaeological sites. There are thousands of archaeological sites between these two rivers, and they show you where where people lived at that time, you know, how the area flourished. Now, that map was not much changed until the 1950s when they brought in, with the new oil wealth that the Iraqis began to have after 1948, they were able to bring in big new irrigation projects like this. And here you see an ancient canal running through this modern system. And over here, this had been desert until the 50s. And now, this picture was taken by someone in the 60s. I don't know whether I took it or someone else did. You have farmhouses, and you had palm trees, and you have, you know, it's green, and you know, it's all because they had this little stream going by, which is a canal. Now, I said there were limiting factors. The limiting factor is the salt which is in the soil and in the rivers. There's been a lot of salt brought down with the rivers over time, and that salt accumulates in the land itself. If you over-irrigate, if you don't give a period for the fields to fallow, to rest, you will end up getting this buildup of salt. That's not snow, that is salt on the riverbank. And that will eventually destroy the fields. And so if you're not doing the fallowing, you can destroy a field within a matter of 10 to 15 years. And here you have a picture these are not real camel nomads. This is a guy who used to be a camel nomad but settled down near Nippur where we work. He came to work for us, and he was going across the desert with his wife. He had taken some stuff across from the Tigris to the Euphrates to sell it. And we happened to run into him in the desert one day, and that's him and his camels and his wife. But they are going over a landscape which is full of sand, but underneath this there are fields which were irrigated as late as 1940. That's how fast it can change. Now, as you get down further south in Iraq, you come to the marshes. And the marshes have been very, very much in the news in the past 20 years with charges that Saddam Hussein destroyed the marshes and drained all the marshes. In fact, the marshes were mostly gone by about 1988, 89, because of irrigation going on up in Turkey. The Turks have captured both the Tigris and Euphrates now. They had not taken total control until about 1995, but they were already taking so much water out of the river that both rivers were already low. Then you have dams in Syria. There are 3 dams in Syria on the Tigris, and then Iraq had put dams on both the Tigris and Euphrates, so by the time you get down past Baghdad, there's a much, much less of a water flow, and the marshes were drying up like crazy. And so the last time I was in the marshes in 1989, the village that tourists would go to get into boats and then be traveling along, boats like that one, and be traveling around in the reeds, that village, which used to be right at the edge of the marsh, was 5 miles away from the marsh. And there were these boats like that sitting in the desert, and they'd just been left there because there was no marsh to carry them. That was already happening in 1988, 89. So by the time of the Gulf War and in 1991, and afterwards when Saddam is supposed to have destroyed the marshes, in fact what he did was barely had an effect because they were already almost gone. But it's easy to blame Saddam, and so people do it. Now the marshes have been a constant part of the landscape in Iraq because the water comes down in the spring, and without the dams, it comes down in an uncontrolled fashion. And in ancient times, it would come down too much of it at one time. It would end up in marshes. And if we back up a couple to that map, there, it would end up, well, this map will do. It would end up, the extraneous water, the extra water would end up in the low parts of, this is the lowest part between the 2 rivers. You would form these big marshes here, and you had marshes here, but you also had big marshes here. And in ancient times, probably around just about every major city, you would have had a marsh. Because they can't control it, so they take advantage of the fact that it's there, and they use it. There's another marsh here, here, here. This was in the 50s, before all this irrigation, and all these marshes had pretty much disappeared except for that one and about half of this one at this point. You use those marshes because they are fantastic sources of plant and animal life. This is a scene from an Assyrian relief where the Assyrian soldiers are chasing Babylonians in the marsh. And the marshes have always been a place of refuge. People who get in trouble with the government run to the marshes, and they hide in the marshes. And that has always been the case. There are ancient Babylonian records like that. The marshes are full of fish and birds, and you have ancient records in which people go out and collect hundreds and hundreds of thousands of birds, tons of fish. And also there are turtles and all sorts of other animals that live in the marshes. And around the marshes you also get pigs, and there are still pigs around the marshes. And down in this area you get water buffalo. Water buffalo have also been in Iraq for a long time. Down in the marshes, you get these reed houses. You find these reed houses scattered around the landscape now because as the people have had to leave the marshes because the water left, they've gone to other places and have built reed houses in other places. And these reed houses, ones like that one, the one I was just showing, those are really for the built by very, very rich people or the sheikhs of the tribe. And the tribes go in and they get coffee and they sit around and talk about what's going on and they decide things. And guests are put up in places like this. Now, they're also ancient. You can see from this house made of reeds on this stone, this is sort of like a stone trough which was found down in near the site of Ur. And it's dated from about 2700 BC. It's always been a part of the landscape. These boats, these so-called taradas, that's the Arab name for them, which are still in existence. This is one of our people going off on a marsh trip. You find the exact a model of one of these boats already from the Ur cemetery dating back to something like 2500, 2600 BC. where the two rivers come together, the Tigris and Euphrates, it's a town called Qurna. And this is, people like to see as where the Garden of Eden was. And a lot of biblical people have claimed that was the Garden of Eden. And in fact, in Qurna, there was a tree which had, the other side has a sign saying, this is the tree of Adam, this is the tree of good and evil. This is from that time. It's a eucalyptus tree, and the eucalyptus tree was introduced into Iraq no earlier than 1930s. So this Garden of Eden this tree dates only about the 1930s. Now the last I saw of this, after the first Gulf War, this tree had been very badly destroyed. And I know that they have planted a new one there because someday tourists will come back and will want to see the tree. Okay, in the south of Iraq, and especially south of Basra, along where the two rivers come together forms what is called the Shatt al-Arab, or the Arab River. And it runs down to the Gulf, about 100 kilometers. And all along there are millions of these palm trees. And there's a guy up in the palm tree. The palm tree will not take care of itself. Human beings have to go up at least 3 to 4 times during the season. They have to pollinate it. They have to go from one tree to take the pollen from one tree and put it in another. Then they have to go up 2 or 3 times to do certain things to it in the season. And then finally they go up the last time and they cut down the dates and bring them down at harvest time. There are also many, many sheep and goats in Iraq, both north and south, and it's one of the major parts of the economy. It was also one of the major parts of ancient economy. Especially the wool would be turned into textiles, which would be sold as the main economic basis of ancient Mesopotamia. Textiles were the major things they were selling to people inside and outside. Now, there are also cows, and cows have been in Iraq since prehistoric time also. The water buffalo down here, which loves living in the marshes and in rivers and in canals. The water buffalo was introduced sometime before 2400 BC. We have very beautiful illustrations of them in Akkadian art, and they are still very much part of the economy. They're supposed to have been imported from India. That's what people think. Okay, horses have been in Iraq since at least 2600, but don't take a major role probably until around 16 or 1700. Camels have had an enormous impact after 1200 BC, and because they carry a great deal more than any other animal, and they can live in deserts, as everyone knows. These are Assyrian reliefs. That's in our own halls, and this is from the British Museum. Draft animals, horses are still used, or were used historically. This is a Baghdad tram from 1919. And this is a man in 2011 with the problems with Iraq. You see these big blast walls. That's one of the things America left them, is these big blast walls cutting up the city of Baghdad. And you have lots of taxis and other sorts of automobiles. In fact, way too many. There's huge traffic jams in Baghdad. But you still have horse transport for certain things. And of course, you have the Arabian horse. Iraq is famous for its horses, and has been one of the major contributors to the Arabian horse breed, including race horses that we all know. Okay, with all that abundance mixed with uncertainty because of the salt problem, and also the fact that there's always been a mixture of people in Iraq, in ancient Mesopotamia. There were Sumerians, Akkadians, there were Hurrians, there were Subartians, there were all sorts of other folks, and it was very often invaded. And it has gone through many, many changes of government, and big new groups come in and take over. And for instance, like the Kassites, sometime around 1600 BC, come into the country, become the leading dynasty, and they are Indo-European speakers, totally different from the people who were there before. The Sumerians have a language which is connected to no other living language, or a dead language that we know of. Akkadian is a form of Semitic language which is related to Arabic and Hebrew and Aramaic, but the Kassite is Indo-European, and they come in and they run the country for about 400 years. Now, with all this mixture and all this uncertainty, there's a lot of elaboration of gods and goddesses with one another and with human beings. And we have very, very good examples of statues these are small statues of bronze god and goddess. They both have 4 faces. This unfortunately was bought on the market, in Baghdad, so we don't know exactly where it comes from. It seems to date to about, say, 1900 BC, but it's far better if you can find these things in archaeological context, such as this. That's all busted up because Ur was conquered, and people love breaking up the statues of people they conquer. This is a statue of Ningal, who was the wife of the moon god at Ur. This is presented, the inscription on the side said it's presented by an Anatum, the daughter of Ishmi-Dagan of Isin, the capital city at that time of the whole area, and about 2091 to 2074, somewhere in that period. And it was found actually in a sanctuary, in Ningal's sanctuary in Ur. Now this was found also in situ, found in a house, not in a house, but found in a small shrine in the town of Ur at about the same time. And this is 4 views of the same statue, front views, 2 side views, and the back view. And you'll notice that she's sitting on a goose. Her throne is a goose. And the goose is related to to 2 or 3 gods or goddesses. It could be Bao, it could be Nin-Ezin, who is Nin-Ezina, who is the lady of Isin, who later becomes the goddess Gula, the goddess of medicine. But Gula also later on takes on a dog as her symbol. The gods very, very often have symbols that they go with. They either carry a specific kind of a weapon, or they have a dog or some other thing that goes with them as the symbol of who they are and what they do. We have here in this collection a great number of these ancient Sumerian statues from the towns of Eshnuna and Khafaji and Tel Ajrab in the Diyala region, dug up by the Oriental Institute in the 30s. And these are thought to be representations of human beings that are left in temples to pray to the gods and to thank the gods for blessings. Sometimes on the backs you will see an inscription, and it sometimes will say things like, "For the life of Mr. X, his wife such and such presented this." And we think in those cases what is happening is the man was sick and they went and made a big gift and left the statue, and he became well, or they leave the statue after he recovered. We think that's what's going on in places like that. It may be different from that, but we don't know. Now, it has been thought that these statues sat in the sanctuary on benches on both sides in front of the cult statue. That's now in question, because if you actually go and look where these statues are found, with the exception of groups like this from Khafaji and Tel Asmar, which were actually found in holes right next to the altar. They were buried next to the altar. Most of these statues and most of the other statues are found outside the sanctuary. They're outside. They're in various places in the courtyard and in specific rooms outside the sanctuary. So they may not have been in the sanctuary. Maybe they were taken in once or twice. Maybe they're taken in specific times. But we don't know exactly the relationship to the sanctuaries, except for when they went out of use, they were buried. And when do they go out of use? Probably when the person has died or the family. It's like an endowment for buildings. You know, this is a such and such hall. You know, Mr. and Mrs. X have given this building. Well, you know, the endowments at the Art Institute only last for 50 years. Sorry, the Metropolitan Museum. You give a hall, but they only guarantee it for 50 years. Then they'll get someone else to give some money, and they'll name it for someone else. So it may be something like, you know, the people have died, so there's no point in having the statue there anymore. So each time they're going to renew the temple. These temples are made of mud brick, meaning it's not baked. And mud brick will wear out within, say, 30 to 50 years. Well, when they're ready to, they say it's time to redo this building. They take the roof off, they knock the building down into itself, forming a platform, and then they build another building on top of it. And so each time they do this, they seem to have made a hole next to the altar, and they bury the dead statues. And sometimes, and this is where many of our statues have come from. Now, there are other things which are less grand. There are these beautiful figurines, statues made of stone, but you also get little figurines made out of clay. And this is one from our collection on the left. And these are thought to be related to women wanting to have children. Having children is extraordinarily important. Having children in a society such as ancient Mesopotamia or current Near Eastern societies is extraordinarily important, especially in situations where if you don't have a male child to carry on the line, there may be a second wife, or there may be a divorce, and you'll have a different wife. So fertility and praying to have a child, praying to have children, especially to have male children, is extraordinarily important. And we think that these are somehow related to that. It hasn't completely been worked out. Well, the interesting thing about these little figurines, they're made by hand usually, and they are then fired in an oven. And later on, they make them with molds, so they don't look as exactly like these. Sort of look like gingerbread figures. But the others look much more. They're much better sculpted, and they're much more in the round. But they're not. They're really more like plaques than like little figurines. They're also about the same time, and continue to be seen, these others, which can sometimes be very, very crude. They're not very well made at all, but they also are fired. And we have one or two from Nippur in which they're doing this. We have one that's doing it's doing this and this. And this particular one is doing this and this. So they're indicating the illness they've got. And these would be left in the temple of Gula, or her predecessor Nin-Ezen before this. And we have found these in situ in the temple of Gula at Nippur in the last 20 years. Well, more than 20 years. We haven't been able to work there in a very long time. You also get male figurines, and these, like the female figurines, they change through time. The male figurines change through time. There's one type of figurine from about the same time in which you see a man carrying a man carries an animal. Normally we think it's a sheep, and they're probably going to be taking those and giving them in to a temple. Now, we don't quite have worked out the relationship of this sort of formal religion which you get with statues in sanctuaries, and this sort of folk religion which you're getting with these little figurines and the various other things they do. There are lots and lots of incantations and other kinds of rituals we know of, which are written down in cuneiform, in which people do certain things in order to try to get certain results. My favorite one is what do you do if a dog pees on you? Because that is terrible bad luck. So what they do is, there's a text that says you have to go down to the river, and you have to walk so many times front ways and so many times back ways in the river, and then you come up on the bank, and you make a little altar, or a little house, or a little altar out of reeds, and you make a figurine of a dog, and you burn the reeds, the reed structure, and then you take the figurine of the dog, and it's not baked, you just take this little thing you've made that looks like a dog. You take it up into the town, and you throw it into the door of the first tavern you come to. And it says that tavern's business will go off for a while, but you will be rid of the curse. Right? So, this is a kind of folk religion. This is kind of, we think of it, well, this is magic, but it's the common religion. And we're constantly finding these little figurines and little dog figurines and all, you think of it, well, they're toys. Well, maybe they are toys, but maybe they're not toys. And you do these things sometimes in your own house, or you do them wherever it's required, you do the ritual. And when we were digging the temple of Gula at Nippur, we were in the back. We never did get to the main shrine, the front of the building. We were in the back of the building. But we were finding these little figurines in the Gula temple. What I was hoping to do after 1990, we were going to come back, and for 10 years we were going to open up a huge hole and look at the Gula temple in its neighborhood. We're going to look at the area around it, see if there were shops around it where they were making these things. It's sort of similar to what you would get at Fatima or at Lourdes, where you can buy, at Lourdes, you can buy or you used to be, I don't know if you still can, you can buy a fish, a purple fish made of plastic with a picture of the Virgin of Lourdes on it, and you take that purple fish and you unscrew the top, and you could get some of the holy water and you could take it home with you. I was in the hospital once with an operation, and someone came back from Lourdes and gave me one of those. Anyway, without the holy water, unfortunately. You're dealing with things like that when you're dealing with these figurines. There's this grand religion up here, and then there's what people are doing down here. And how much the common people actually get into the temples and actually see of the temples is in question. How many people ever got into a sanctuary is in question. Probably the priest and occasionally the king would do something inside the sanctuary, but probably most people never got inside. Maybe they could come into the outer courtyard, but most people never got inside the temples at all, I think. I may be wrong. We may prove it wrong. We may prove that's wrong at some point, but that's what I think it is. Okay, there are all sorts of other kinds of things like this Pazuzu. Now, Pazuzu played a very, very bad role in the movie The Exorcist. You know, that movie starts at a site called Hatra in the north of Iraq, and they dig up a Pazuzu. Well, the funny thing is Pazuzu was long past his currency. They no longer did Pazuzu statues at the time of Hatra. But at Hatra, they found a Pazuzu in the movie. But anyway, Pazuzu got a bad reputation from that movie, but in fact, Pazuzu is a demon who protects human beings from other demons. And one of the really bad ones is Lilith, who is also known from the Bible. And she's famous for going around stealing your children. And these demons, and there are other demons, and there are ghosts and things, they come up out of the ground into your house, and they cause trouble. Every single private house we have dug in Nippur, every single one, has had at the doorways, next to the hearth, sometimes in the bathroom, little bowls, very, very simple bowls, buried upside down under the floors, in floor after floor after floor, in house after house after house. And this is to protect the house. Sometimes you see a bowl with a few bones in it, and you have you'll have this bowl over it. And that, I think, is they're trying to give a gift to the demons so they won't come in and destroy the family. That tradition lives from as early as I've ever dig in Iraq, which goes back to the Uruk period, down to about 3500 BC, up through into at least the Parthian period, where we also get it. But once you get to the Sasanian period, after the time of Christ, you begin to get in the Sasanian period and in the early Islamic period, going from about 500 to something like 800 AD at Nippur. I don't know if it happens anywhere else. We have thousands of these bowls at Nippur hundreds have been dug, and probably there are many thousands more. What these bowls are, these are found, we've found them actually in situ, in houses, in the Islamic period and in the Sasanian period. They're buried upside down in the same positions. We find these very early bowls. And what they do, they have an inscription in them which runs from the center. What did I do with my pointer? Now I've lost the pointer. Gone. Oh, it's in my pocket. It runs from the center to the outside. And very often what you'll have in the middle is sometimes you'll have a very scary figure. This one's not so scary, but that's the demon in chains. They chain the demon down, and then they hold it in its place with this, which is essentially a prayer. And sometimes they will get very, very exact. They will say, protect this house, protect the man, his wife, his children, his grandchildren, his old mother, and also protect the animals. And they get very, very detailed. The animals of the house, from this demon, and they bury them under the floor. And these are in Aramaic and sometimes in Hebrew, and the writing, there are 3 or 4 different writings. And Nippur is very, very famous for having produced these. Most of them, unfortunately, were not found in very good context. We have found them in good context in the last few years. Okay, you have protected figures in the major religion also. This is from our own, it's from the Mesopotamian Hall. You have these guardian figures who stand on the outside of a sanctuary and this particular one is carrying a vase of water, and the water would flow out and come over his shoulders normally. This is an old motif of the vase with water, which is, the gods bring us water, which brings irrigation, which makes life possible. You know it's a god because he has horns. You also have this guy with horns, the human-headed winged bull that dominates our halls. There he is as he was actually found by the French. The French first found him, and then Chicago went back and found him again, and then they brought him home. But he's also behind him, you have this figure of a man facing forward holding a lion in his hand. He's a huge guy holding a lion. Well, that's connected to very, very early things like this little cup, which is also in our collection. This is a stone cup from very, very early. It probably goes to about 3,200, 3,000 BC, in which you have a figure with the same sort of, look at the hairdo. It's exactly the same hairdo, with the beard. And he is holding onto 2 lions, one on either side. And is this Gilgamesh? It may be. It may not be. I choose to think it is Gilgamesh. And why wouldn't you have it be Gilgamesh, since it's the main well-known myth of ancient Mesopotamia? And we have in our collection 3 fragments of that Gilgamesh epic, which tells the story of the great things that he did and how he sought everlasting life. Now, there are kings in this society. They organize society. They also use religion and are used by it. This is from the site of Uruk in the south of Iraq. This is one of the earliest depictions of a king. We have our own depiction of a king from the Akkadian period around 2300 BC. Kings are very big, important figures at this time. And they are builders. They build temples and then they have feasts. This is probably the king sitting here and then there, or here. And actually, that looks like, that's probably the king. That's probably his wife or his son. And then you have, I think that's supposed to be a man. And then you have people bringing the goods to make the feast. And here you have people playing the orchestra for that feast. You very often will get depictions of the king actually doing the building work. Now, that particular thing we were looking at, notice there's a hole in the middle. This is a plaque made of stone, and the stone had a peg put through it, and it would be in this position near a door. And the idea is you shut the door by bringing a rope through it, and you wrap it around the peg, and then you, if you want to secure it, you put a piece of, you put wet clay around it, and then you seal it with a cylinder seal. Well, then that's not much of a way of securing something. I mean, anybody could go there and knock that off in a minute and go through it. But the thing is that since you have locked it, other people have got to respect it, otherwise they'll be in trouble, although people do rob people all the time, and did then. But also, since you have put your stamp on it, it says, I have authority to do this, and you have got to respect that authority. We have an example here. This is another one of your featured articles, featured items. You have cylinder seal impressions of clay, which came off either a container or a door. And these are sealed with a particular seal, a seal which we have on display in the collection. And you roll that out on a modern piece of clay, and it shows the king, Bilalama, in front of the god, standing here, sitting here. And the inscription says, I am Bilalama, I am doing something in front of this god or this goddess. This is the way these inscriptions run. But this is one of the very few cases in which we actually have a seal and we have a piece of clay that was rolled on it. It's very, very rare to get that in any site. For some reason, it just doesn't happen. Maybe because, well, we know there's a lot of recycling that goes on. We know that they take the clay off these things and they put them down in a basin, and then they pound them up and they put water on it again, and they remake the clay and reuse it. The reason for that is in order to make really good clay impressions, in order to make good tablets, it takes a lot of work. You can't just take any sand or any clay. You need you can't just take any, I shouldn't have said sand. You can't take any clay and do this. You need to have a really pure clay. And that generally means you take clay either from an extraordinarily rare source, which has very little inclusion in it, or you have to take it and keep cleaning it. You keep putting water through it and sieving it out and getting rid of any impurities in it. It takes a lot of work. So if you've got clay already done, you recycle it. And this is what they tend to do. They tend to recycle these things, so we don't often get the clay which goes with this. And we have hundreds of seals in these places. The site at which this was found, Eshnuna, ancient Eshnuna, modern Tel Asmar, there were something like 500 seals found at that site. And with those 500 seals, only this one also had clay impressions that went with it. We have also hundreds of clay impressions from that site, but they don't match with the seals themselves. In some cases, because things are being sealed and sent away someplace. That's part of what's happening. And in some cases, the clay we have is being taken off. The clay impressions we find on in the debris are things which have come into the building maybe from 10 miles away, maybe from 100 miles away. And they're coming into the building and being taken apart, and then you take the goods that are in these containers. Okay. Now, the kings actually show themselves carrying the first clay container of basketed clay for setting down the foundations of these buildings they built. This particular one is for the Enlil temple at Nippur, the Akur, and it shows Unamu, and then you have a tablet saying that he's the guy doing this, and he's building this temple, and a few little gold-covered beads to say, this is part of the gift I give to the temple. To show that that tradition still lives, this is not a posed photograph. That's the way actually people still, even today in Iraq, if you're doing a mud brick house, you have a round metal container and you carry the dirt that way. It's not, as you can see, a clean job. Okay. Kings also not just build temples, they also give things to temples. They give land, when they go off on a campaign and bring back booty, they give the booty to the temple also. I'm running over. Should I stop?
No, you're good. You're good.
I'm still good?
You have it.
Oh, I'm not running over. I've still got 15 minutes. Okay. No, we're doing well. Okay. Anyway, the kings also give land. This is a very early example. This dates from the Uruk period, from about 3200 BC, and it shows a king, that same figure with the beard that I showed you earlier, giving, he's giving some sort of there's a lion head or bull head up here, and it looks like it's a pestle, something for pounding. And he's handing that over to this woman, and the inscription says that he is handing over land. The numbers are here. He's handing over land. The numbers are also here. He's handing over land, so many acres of land, to this temple for its use, for its support through time. So they also do that. And when people and individuals gave their statues and left them in the temple for the recovery of someone's health or for the continued health of someone, they probably also gave money of some sort or some sort of wealth. They gave grain, or maybe they gave property of some sort, either property in the city or property outside, fields, things of that sort. You would expect that to be true. Maybe they gave silver. Okay, the king is also shown from very early periods as a hunter. Here's the same king with the beard and the little turban fighting lions. He's with a spear and with bow and arrow. And that dates also from that same early period. And he's also shown in that early period in warfare. There he stands, and these are the bound prisoners. And these are the prisoners being bound. And you get warfare scenes with the king. So the king is being shown as a builder. He's being shown as a warrior. He's being shown as someone who is in relationship to gods. He's also probably, we don't have a depiction of him as an administrator, but he's also an administrator. Now, that tradition carries on. This is a piece which is in the Louvre. It's a so-called Naram-Sin stela of Naram-Sin, the king of the Akkadians, from about 2300. There he is. He's claiming divinity. This is one of the very few kings who claims to be divine in his lifetime. A few are made divine after they die. But unlike Egypt, where the pharaoh is divine, you don't get away with being divine in Mesopotamia. Things fall apart too fast. You don't keep your dynasty going. A dynasty that lasts 400 years, such as the Kassite, is a rarity. Dynasties die usually in about 100 years or less. You don't get to keep it that long. And so they don't claim to be divine. They tried it a little bit in this period and going on for another 100 years or so, but they don't get away with it. So they stopped doing it. He's wearing a horn crown looking very much like Brunhilde in an opera, but in fact he got the horn crown because he's saying, I am a god. Or at least the person carving this stone is saying he's a god. And look how much bigger he is than the other people. He's big not because he is physically big, but because he's the important guy. He is projected as big because he's so important. And these are his soldiers coming up, and these are the enemy begging for mercy and being hung up on, falling down onto trees. That's also, by the way, one of the early depictions trying to get it landscape, trying to do a bit of perspective. It doesn't quite work, but it's one of the early moves towards perspective. It's one of the great pieces of art. Okay, this carries on clear through the Assyrian period, and we have lots and lots of battle scenes and worship scenes and various other things, evidence of lots of royal building, temple building in the Neo-Assyrian period. This is in our collection, Ashurnasirpal, the king of the Neo-Assyrian period. And here is something which used to be in our halls. This is an artist's depiction of what the wall paint was in one of the buildings at the site of Khorsabad, which was dug by the Oriental Institute in the 20s and 30s. And there used to be a full-size replica of that wall painting. I think actually it must have been about half-size. Because there are human beings down here. It's a very big thing. The Oriental Institute actually found this wall painting fallen down in the middle of the room, and they were able to take it back up piece by piece and reconstruct what was there. And they were able to reconstruct how it was made. And we had a replica of this in plywood on the halls in what is now right around the corner from on the elevator stand, where the Assyrian gallery continues before you get into the Hittite stuff. That used to be there, and they took it down in the 60s, and it never went back up, and it was destroyed as far as I know. But I have no idea why that was taken down. It drives me nuts. Okay, snack rib prism. This is also in our halls. This is an example of the kind of what is called an annal, or it's really a chronological recording of the deeds of the king. And this particular king is Sennacherib, and in this particular one, it has gotten a lot of attention because it talks about the siege of Jerusalem, and it has this line of Hezekiah being caught like a bird in a cage. And this is from 689 BC. From Babylon, we have these two pieces. We have these two lions. These came from the processional way. They were on the road as you came from the outside of the city toward the Ishtar Gate, and you would pass by these lions. And the lions are protecting the site also, but the lions also are reflecting the power of the king. From very early periods, it's not just Gilgamesh who dominates lions, but kings are seen to dominate lions. They are hunters of lions. And so the power of the lion is transferred to the power of the king. It's one of these very, very deep-seated things that goes back in. Many societies have this kind of thing where you take the spirit of the thing you kill and it becomes part of you. So there's something like this going on here. Now, our basalt tablet, I could have shown this earlier when I was talking about the king buying property. This is another case of a king buying property, but not as far as we know for a temple. The king himself is buying huge tracts of land. This is not little bits of land. And what he's doing is he's probably buying these from the tribal people who own them, the tribal farmers who own them. And he has to pay off these people in so much silver or so much something else which they can see as a benefit to them. There's a later version of this from the Akkadian period in which the king who is named is buying huge, huge tracts of land. And there he is paying out silver to some people. He's giving out garments, textiles to other people, and then he is having a huge feast at which everybody is invited to come to sit. Well, by doing that, by having everyone come in and to have a meal, and to have certain people in the group getting these presents, what you're doing is paying off the sheikh probably and the smaller important heads of families in a tribal group in an area. But by having everyone come and be in the feast, everyone there is saying, yes, this can happen. They're agreeing to let it happen. Now, when this land was bought, it's not probable that the people were pushed off the land. They probably stayed on the land and became tenant farmers for the king. And the king might put one of his officials or one of his sons as the owner of this or the administrator of this, but essentially the people stay in place and become tenant farmers for the king. Now, this silver coil, very, very important thing. It probably is one of the earliest forms of money we have, currency. Silver is a medium of exchange earlier than that. You know, people pay people off in silver, so much amounts of silver. It's only by weight, and but they didn't have a nice, usable, handleable kind of thing. This coil gives them something they can basically hold onto, clip off a piece, use it, say, weigh it and say, okay, this is it, I'll have to add a little bit more, there you have your silver. Silver is very, very valuable. But before silver, people were exchanging things in terms of grain, in terms of wheat or barley. And but even there, you would sometimes say, this barley is worth this much silver. So there is the idea of a currency. You don't get real coins until probably, there's a hint at Nineveh. There was 4 or 5 little squared silver bits found at Nineveh by Layard in the 1850s, which may have been the earliest coins we know. For sure, by the time of King Midas and the Achaemenid Persians, we have coins, and this particular coin is a Parthian coin. These are people who came from Iran and conquered Iraq and made their capital near Baghdad at about 150 BC. And that particular coin is a bit later than that. Now, economy. These people have to make a living. And as I said earlier, in Babylonia and Assyria, the main thing they have to sell is textiles, here and there. Now, in about 1900 or so, give or take, the people in the town of Ashur, the main town of Assyria, they set up a system where they would, family firms, and it's very, very much family firms. Family firms would be formed, and they would take a partner from another family, and they would put together an amount of goods, and usually it's textiles. And the textiles sometimes come from Babylonia, or they would also import tin from Iran. It would come to Ashur, and then from Ashur they would take it by donkey back, about 1,000 kilometers up to the central part of Turkey. And there they would sell it. The textiles and tin would go this way, go to the town of Kanesh. From Kanesh they also set up an internal trade where they would trade with other little kingdoms and within the area of Kanesh with other little kingdoms within Turkey. And they would be trading for the same things. And what they want is they want gold or silver. And the gold or silver would go back to Ashur. So that the trade worked that way. And this was happening for about 200 years at about that time. Now, donkey caravans. How much can you carry on a donkey? Normally the caravans are 30 or 40 donkeys. And very often the donkeys would be, they would be guided by a younger member of the family and 2 or 3 helpers. And they would get up to Kanesh, and in Kanesh, one of the older brothers, or a brother of one of the guys in Ashur, would be the person in charge of selling and buying and making decisions. And we know about this because thousands of tablets have been found up here in Turkey, in a town in Kanesh, which record this trade in very, very deep detail. It's fantastic stuff. Donkeys. How much can donkeys carry? These are donkeys from about 1910. At that time, up until about 1930, people up in Turkey used to put together rafts made with very, very big logs. Remember, there is no timber, I should have said, there's no timber in southern Iraq. So if they want to build a big building, they have to get it from Turkey or from somewhere up in that area, Lebanon, or from over in Iran, but basically up in Turkey. So people would put together a raft with these big logs, lash them together, and they would put under them these goat skins, which would be blown up and be used as a balloon. They would put it under the raft, they would lash it in. Then on top of the raft, they would pile on whatever they were selling. They would be selling wool or whatever they were selling. And they would put on the raft also 10 or 15 donkeys and themselves. They would come down the river taking anywhere from 10 days to 40 days, depending on what the river was doing at the time. When they get to Fallujah, which is very close to Baghdad, I'm talking about the Euphrates River. They actually did some of this on the Tigris also. But when they came down to Fallujah, they would then take the raft apart, sell off the lumber. They would take the hides and put them, flatten them, and then put them on the donkey back, and then they'd walk back all the way 40 days or so back to Turkey. They did that at least once or twice a year. So, you know, they could do it in old Assyrian times, they can do it in modern times. And here you have a case where men are dragging a boat. This is also in our hall. They're dragging a boatload of something up along the shore. When you're going upstream, you can't just float down. You have to, if you're going to go upstream, you have to pull it. Or if you get a good wind, you can sail sometimes. But anyway, basically you're pulling it upstream. Now, I was once teaching a class and talking about kings and gods and things, and one of the students in the class said, yeah, but what about the folks? What about the folks? Okay, the folks. Let's go back and get some other folks. These folks are reflected in things like these little plaques. We have several of them on display. These little plaques where people are doing everyday chores. If this is playing a musical instrument, that's using ads to make something. This is a man with a couple of dogs. And this is a woman lying in a bed, and this is a man and a woman doing something which we just have to draw a cloak over. By the way, in Baghdad, there's something called the Baghdad Museum, or the Ethnographic Museum. And it shows signs of everyday life in Baghdad in the 1890s to 1910s. And there's a scene, it says, you know, the wedding, and they have these mannequins. And then there's a scene that says, the wedding night, and the wedding night is only a doorway with a curtain over it. Okay, and finally, you have all these professions. You have people who make pottery. You have people who make these stone, this is a stone mortar and pestle. You have people who are making these beads. And at the same time, you're having people who are putting stuff in these vessels. They're grinding the grain or whatever here. They're storing stuff in this vessel of all sorts of liquid and not. They're making beer. They're making all sorts of things. They also are wearing this jewelry for various, some people, and someone is selling this stuff, someone is selling that, somebody is selling this. And it's not necessarily the same people who make it. So that there's a huge economy involved in all of this, which is not written about much, but it's there. It's reflected in the archaeological record. Okay? And I think that's the end of it. I'm more or less on time. I'm a little over. Yeah.